I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Sharon Patterson's silver Lexus crawling up the gravel driveway to my cabin. It was a Tuesday morning in early March, and I had been enjoying my coffee on the deck overlooking Lake Tahoe, watching the morning mist rise off the water. The cabin had been in my family for 42 years, passed down from my grandfather to my father, and then to me, Kyle Nelson, 3 years ago when Dad died. Sharon was the president of the Tahoe Pines Homeowners Association, and in the 18 months since she had taken over that position, she had made it her personal mission to turn our quiet lakeside community into some kind of suburban nightmare, complete with rules about mailbox colors and acceptable window treatments. I set down my coffee mug and walked around to the front of the cabin, arriving just as Sharon stepped out of her car. She was wearing pressed khakis and a white polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the breast pocket, her blonde bob cut perfectly in place despite the morning breeze. She carried a clipboard, which was never a good sign. "Kyle," she said, not quite making eye contact, "I need to conduct an inspection of your property." "An inspection?" I crossed my arms. "For what?" "We have received multiple complaints about the condition of your structure." As HOA president, I am authorized under Section 12.3 of the Community Bylaws to assess properties that may be in violation of our standards. I looked back at my cabin. Sure, it was not new. The wood siding had weathered to a silvery gray over the decades, and there were a few places where the paint around the windows had peeled. But it was solid, well-maintained where it counted, and it was mine. My grandfather had built half of it with his own hands back in 1983. What complaints? I asked. Sharon flipped through papers on her clipboard. The exterior wood siding shows significant deterioration. The foundation appears to have settling issues. The roof looks to be past its serviceable life, and there are concerns about potential code violations regarding the deck structure. That's ridiculous. The deck is fine. I had it reinforced just 2 years ago. Nevertheless, I need to complete my inspection. You can either cooperate or I will be forced to note your obstruction in my report, which will not help your case. I wanted to tell her exactly where she could put her clipboard, but I also did not want to give her ammunition. Fine. Look around. For the next 45 minutes, Sharon walked around my property, taking photographs with her phone and scribbling notes. She got down on her knees to peer at the foundation. She stood back and took wide shots of the entire cabin from multiple angles. She walked the perimeter of the deck, occasionally stomping her foot on the boards. I followed her the entire time, watching her manufacture problems out of thin air. "This is a structural disaster waiting to happen," she finally announced, returning to where I stood near the front door. "The foundation has clearly shifted. There are signs of wood rot throughout the siding, and frankly, I am concerned this structure may not even be safe to occupy." That is absolutely not true. This cabin has stood here for over 4 decades. It is not going anywhere. Sharon's expression shifted into something that might have been sympathy if I did not know better. "I understand this property has sentimental value, Kyle, but sentiment does not change facts. I am going to have to recommend to the HOA board that this structure be condemned and demolished." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You cannot do that. Actually, under our bylaws we can. Properties that fail to meet community standards and pose potential safety hazards can be required to be brought into compliance or removed. Given the extent of the issues here, I do not see how compliance is feasible. The cost of repairs would likely exceed the value of the structure itself." "What value? This place is worth a fortune. It is lakefront property." "The land has value, certainly. The structure does not. In fact, I would estimate the building itself has essentially zero value at this point. It is a teardown." She pulled a business card from her pocket. "I know this is difficult, but I can put you in touch with a demolition company that works with HOA properties. They offer very competitive rates." "Get off my property," I said quietly. "Excuse me," I said, "get off my property. Now." Sharon's lips pressed into a thin line. "You will be receiving formal notification of the HOA's findings within 72 hours. You will have the opportunity to appeal to the board, but I should warn you that in cases like this, appeals are rarely successful." "Good day, Kyle." I watched her drive away, my hands shaking with anger. The moment her car disappeared down the road, I pulled out my phone and called my attorney, Marcus Webb. Marcus had handled my father's estate and had been a family friend for years. He practiced in South Lake Tahoe and knew property law inside and out. "Kyle, good to hear from you," Marcus answered. "What can I do for you?" I explained what had just happened, barely pausing for breath. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end. "That is aggressive even for an HOA," Marcus finally said. "But unfortunately, depending on how their bylaws are written, they might have the authority to do this. I would need to review the specific language. Can you do that? Soon. Send me a copy of the HOA bylaws and any documentation they provide. In the meantime, do not sign anything and do not let anyone else on your property without me present. And Kyle, you might want to consider getting your own assessment done. If you can prove the structure is sound, it will be much harder for them to justify condemnation. Who should I call? Let me make some inquiries. I will get back to you within the hour." True to his word, Marcus called me back 45 minutes later with the name and number of a structural engineer named David Cho, who had a reputation for thorough, unbiased assessments. I called David immediately, and he agreed to come out the following morning. That night, I barely slept. I kept running through scenarios in my head, each one worse than the last. The cabin was not just a building to me. It represented every summer I had spent here as a kid, learning to fish with my grandfather, helping my dad repair the dock, sitting around the fire pit at night listening to my parents' friends tell stories. It was the place I had proposed to my ex-wife, back when I thought that relationship would last. It was where I had scattered my father's ashes, as he had requested. The idea of some demolition crew tearing it down, reducing all those memories to rubble and scrap wood, made me physically sick. David Cho arrived at 8 the next morning driving a pickup truck loaded with equipment. He was in his mid-40s, wearing jeans and a fleece jacket, and he carried a professional camera and a toolbox full of instruments I could not identify. "Thanks for coming out on short notice," I said, shaking his hand. "No problem." Marcus explained the situation. "Let me take a look and see what we are really dealing with here." David's inspection was nothing like Sharon's theatrical performance. He worked methodically, starting with the foundation and working his way up. He used a level to check for settling, a moisture meter to test for rot, and a thermal imaging camera to look for hidden issues. He crawled into the crawl space beneath the cabin and spent 20 minutes down there with a flashlight. He climbed a ladder to inspect the roof. He tested the deck boards and examined the support posts. After nearly 3 hours, he sat down with me at the deck table and pulled out a tablet. "Okay," he said. "Here is what I found. Your foundation has settled slightly over the years, which is completely normal for a structure this age in this location. There is no structural damage, no cracking, and no indication of ongoing movement. The settling happened decades ago and has stabilized." "What about the siding?" "The exterior shows weathering, which is cosmetic. I found one small area near the back where there is minor dry rot, about a 2-foot section that should be replaced. That is a couple $100 in materials and a day's work. Everything else is solid. The framing is sound, the joists are good, and the roof, while it has maybe 5 years left before you will want to replace it, is currently doing its job just fine. And the deck, David smiled. The deck is overbuilt, if anything. Whoever did that reinforcement work knew what they were doing. It could easily last another 20 years with basic maintenance. I felt the tension in my chest ease slightly. So this cabin is not a structural disaster, not even close. It is a well-maintained older structure showing normal signs of age. Would I recommend some cosmetic updates? Sure. New paint, replacing that section of rot, maybe some landscaping. But condemned? Absolutely not. There is no safety issue here, Kyle. None. Can you put that in writing? I will have a full report to you by tomorrow afternoon with photographs and detailed findings. If this goes to a hearing, I am happy to testify. After David left, I felt like I could breathe again. I called Marcus and filled him in. That is excellent news, Marcus said. Now, when you get the HOA's formal notice, we will respond with David's report and demand they rescind the condemnation. If they refuse, we will file an injunction and take this to court if necessary. How much is this going to cost me? Let us take it one step at a time. But Kyle, you should be prepared for this to get expensive and drawn out. HOAs do not like backing down, especially when the president has dug in their heels. The formal notice arrived by certified mail on Friday, exactly 72 hours after Sharon's visit, as she had promised. It was a thick packet of papers, full of official-sounding language and references to various sections of the bylaws. The core message was simple. The HOA had determined that my cabin constituted a structural hazard and an eyesore that diminished property values for the community. I had 30 days to submit plans for demolition or face legal action, including daily fines of $500 and potential foreclosure on the property to satisfy accumulated penalties. The document included an appraisal that made my blood boil. According to an appraiser hired by the HOA, my cabin had an assessed value of essentially $0. The land was valued at $200,000, but the structure itself was listed as having negative value due to demolition costs estimated at $35,000. I immediately forwarded everything to Marcus along with David's structural report, which had arrived that morning as promised. "This is a joke," Marcus said when he called me back an hour later. "Their appraiser did not even enter the building. Look at the notes." He took exterior photos and made assumptions. Meanwhile, you have got a detailed engineering report showing the structure is sound. So what do? We request a hearing before the HOA board, which is your right under their bylaws. We present David's findings and demand they withdraw the condemnation. I will draft a formal response today. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening at the community center in Tahoe Pines. The HOA board consisted of 5 members, Sharon Patterson as president, along with 2 retired couples who served as vice president, secretary, and board members. I arrived with Marcus, both of us carrying folders of documentation. The community center meeting room was set up like a courtroom, with the board seated at a long table at the front and chairs arranged in rows for residents. About 15 people had shown up to watch, including several of my neighbors. Some gave me supportive nods. Others avoided eye contact. Sharon called the meeting to order and read a summary of the case. Her version of events made it sound like my cabin was on the verge of collapse, and I was stubbornly refusing to address a public safety crisis. When she finished, Marcus stood. "Thank you for the opportunity to respond. My client has obtained an independent structural assessment from a licensed engineer with over 20 years of experience. The findings directly contradict the HOA's claims. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus walked the board through David's report, using printed photos and technical findings. He pointed out the minimal foundation settling, the solid framing, the reinforced deck, and the absence of any safety issues. The only significant issue identified is a 2-foot section of dry rot that can be repaired for a few $100s, Marcus concluded. This is not a structure that requires demolition. It requires basic maintenance that my client is willing to perform. Sharon barely glanced at the documents. I appreciate the effort, but our appraiser has made their determination. The structure fails to meet community standards and must be removed. Your appraiser never entered the building, Marcus countered. He made a visual assessment from the exterior. That is not sufficient basis for condemnation. Our bylaws give the board discretion in these matters, Sharon said. And we have determined that this property negatively impacts the community. One of the other board members, a woman named Patricia, spoke up. I have to say, I have driven by that cabin and it does look rather run down. I can see why residents would complain. Looking run down is not the same as being structurally unsound, Marcus said. If the HOA wants to require cosmetic improvements, that is one conversation. But condemnation and demolition is an extreme measure that is not justified by the facts. The board members huddled together, whispering. After a few minutes, Sharon straightened up. The board has voted to uphold the condemnation. Mr. Nelson has 30 days from the original notice date to submit demolition plans or face penalties. I stood up, anger flooding through me. This is insane. You are destroying my property based on nothing. Mr. Nelson, this meeting is adjourned, Sharon said coldly. As we filed out, one of my neighbors, an older man named Robert who lived 2 properties down, caught my arm. I did not vote to complain about your place, he said quietly. In fact, I do not know anyone who did. Sharon has been talking about your cabin for months, saying it brings down everyone's property values. I think she has it in for you specifically. Why would she care about my cabin? Robert glanced around and lowered his voice. Her daughter is a real estate agent, big developer type. There have been rumors that Sharon wants to force out some of the older property owners so newer, more expensive homes can be built. More expensive homes mean higher HOA dues and more control. Just something to think about. That night, I could not stop thinking about what Robert had said. I started doing research, digging through county records and property transactions. What I found made the pieces fall into place. Over the past 18 months since Sharon had become HOA president, 3 other longtime property owners in Tahoe Pines had sold their homes, all under pressure from the HOA for various alleged violations. In all 3 cases, the properties had been purchased by a development company called Cascade Mountain Properties, and the registered agent for Cascade Mountain Properties was Melissa Patterson, who, according to her real estate license, was Sharon's daughter. I called Marcus first thing in the morning. I think I know what is happening here. Sharon is using the HOA to force sales so her daughter's company can buy up properties. Marcus was silent for a moment. That would be a serious conflict of interest. Potentially illegal if she has been using her HOA authority for personal financial gain. But we would need proof. What kind of proof? Communications showing coordination between Sharon and her daughter. Financial records showing Sharon benefited from the sales. Something that demonstrates this is not just coincidence. How do I get that, legally? That is the challenge. But Kyle, if what you are saying is true, this is bigger than just your cabin. You might want to consider reaching out to the other property owners who were forced to sell. See if they will talk to you. I tracked down contact information for the 3 previous sellers. The first two did not want to discuss it, clearly bitter about the whole experience and just wanting to move on. But the third, a woman named Dorothy Wheeler, who had owned a cabin 5 properties down from mine, agreed to meet me for coffee in South Lake Tahoe. Dorothy was in her 70s, sharp-eyed and clearly still angry about what had happened to her. "Sharon went after me for landscaping violations," Dorothy explained. "Said my trees were too close to the property line and posed a fire hazard. I had those trees professionally assessed and they were fine. But the HOA kept threatening fines, thousands of dollars. My husband had just died, and I did not have the energy or money to fight it. When the offer came to buy my property, I took it just to be done with the whole nightmare." "Who made the offer?" "Cascade Mountain Properties. They bought it for below market value, but at that point, I just wanted out." Dorothy leaned forward. "A month after I sold, I drove by my old place. They had torn down my cabin and were building a massive new house, probably worth $2 million. Those trees, Sharon said, were a fire hazard, still standing. It was all made up." "Did you ever see any connection between Sharon and the company?" "Not directly. But I will tell you this, after the sale closed, I saw Sharon and a younger woman who looked just like her having lunch together at a restaurant in Truckee. They were looking at documents and laughing. I looked up Sharon later and found out about her daughter. I put 2 and 2 together, but what could I do? I had already sold." Armed with this information, I met with Marcus again. He brought in a paralegal, and together we started building a case. We filed a formal complaint with the California Bureau of Real Estate, alleging that Sharon had abused her position as HOA president to benefit her daughter's real estate business. We also filed a complaint with the county, noting potential HOA governance violations. But investigations took time, and I was running out of it. The 30-day deadline was approaching, and the HOA had made it clear they would start imposing fines the day after it passed. $500 per day would add up fast. "We can file for an injunction," Marcus said. "Ask the court to halt the HOA's action while the investigation proceeds. But that is not guaranteed, and it will cost you several $1,000s in legal fees." I was running the numbers in my head, trying to figure out how long I could sustain a legal fight, when my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize with a 775 area code. "Is this Kyle Nelson?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Jennifer Reeves. I am a reporter with the Tahoe Daily Tribune. I have been investigating HOA conflicts in the area, and your name came up in some documents I obtained. I was wondering if you would be willing to talk about your situation." I looked at Marcus, who had heard enough to understand what was happening. He nodded. "I would be very willing to talk," I said. Jennifer came to the cabin 2 days later with a photographer. She spent 3 hours interviewing me, reviewing documents and taking photos of the property. She also interviewed David Cho and spoke with Dorothy Wheeler. The resulting article ran on the front page of the Tribune the following Sunday under the headline, "Tahoe, HOA President, Accused of Profiting from Forced Property Sales." The article laid out everything: Sharon's aggressive condemnation campaign, her daughter's development company, the pattern of long-time owners being forced out and their properties being redeveloped. It included photos of my cabin alongside David's assessment, confirming it was structurally sound. It also featured Dorothy's story and quoted a real estate attorney saying that if the allegations were true, Sharon could face serious legal consequences. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The story was picked up by regional news outlets and then by a San Francisco television station. By Monday afternoon, reporters were calling me constantly. The HOA's office phone, according to neighbors, was ringing nonstop with angry residents demanding answers. Sharon tried to control the damage with a statement claiming the article was full of inaccuracies, and that all HOA actions had been taken in good faith based on legitimate concerns. But the cat was out of the bag. 3 days after the article ran, I received a voicemail from Sharon. Her voice was tight and controlled. "Kyle, this is Sharon Patterson. In light of recent publicity and to avoid further conflict, the HOA board has agreed to suspend action on your property pending an independent assessment. Someone from the County Code Enforcement Office will be contacting you to schedule an inspection. The HOA will abide by their determination." I played the message for Marcus. Is this a win? It is a significant step back for them. County Code Enforcement is not going to condemn your cabin based on cosmetic issues, but keep your guard up. Sharon is not done yet. The county inspector came out the following week. He was a no-nonsense guy in his 50s who had clearly seen it all. He spent an hour going through the cabin with a checklist, examining the same things David had looked at. "I do not see any code violations," he told me when he finished. "The structure meets all applicable building codes for its age and classification. You have got that small section of rot that should be addressed, but that is a maintenance issue, not a condemnation issue. I will file my report with the county and send a copy to your HOA. So they cannot force me to tear it down, not based on anything I have seen. If they try, they are opening themselves up to liability." That should have been the end of it, but I still had not accounted for Sharon's determination. 2 days after the county inspector's visit, I received another certified letter, this time from a law firm representing the HOA. The letter stated that while the physical structure might meet minimum code requirements, the property remained in violation of HOA aesthetic standards. They were demanding that I make specific improvements within 60 days. New siding, new roof, new paint, upgraded landscaping, and deck refinishing. The estimated cost for all the improvements was over $150,000. It was a new angle of attack, and it was clever. They could not force me to demolish based on safety, so now they were going after me for appearance, burying me in expensive cosmetic requirements. I was sitting on my deck, staring at the legal letter and trying to figure out my next move, when a sleek black SUV pulled up the driveway. A man in his 60s stepped out, wearing expensive casual clothes and carrying a leather portfolio. "Kyle Nelson," he called out. "Who is asking?" "My name is Richard Carlson. I am a real estate appraiser based in Reno. I apologize for dropping by unannounced, but I read the article about your situation, and I wanted to see your property in person." "Are you working for the HOA?" "No, nothing like that. I specialize in lakefront properties throughout the Tahoe Basin. The appraiser the HOA used, the one who valued your cabin at $0, is someone I have had professional disagreements with before. His assessments tend to be, shall we say, influenced by whoever is paying him. When I saw his name in the article and his valuation, I knew something was wrong." "So why are you here?" "Professional curiosity, initially, but also because I believe in accurate valuations. Would you mind if I took a look around?" I figured I had nothing to lose. Richard spent the next hour examining every aspect of the cabin and the property. He took measurements, looked at sight lines to the lake, checked the dock access, and reviewed the property boundaries. He was thorough and professional, asking intelligent questions about the history and construction. When he finished, he sat down with me at the deck table and opened his portfolio. "Kyle, I am going to be blunt with you. Whoever told you this structure is worthless was either incompetent or lying. This is a prime piece of Tahoe lakefront real estate. The cabin itself, while it shows its age cosmetically, is fundamentally sound based on what I can see and based on the engineering report mentioned in the article. The lot size is generous, you have direct lake access, and the location is excellent. What are you saying? I am saying that if you wanted to sell this property today, as is, you could easily get $900,000 to $1 million. If you made some cosmetic updates, new exterior, modern interior finishes, you would be looking at 1.2 to 1.5 million, easily. The number hit me like a truck. That cannot be right. I assure you it is. I have sold properties throughout this area. I know the market. In fact, if you are willing, I would like to do a formal appraisal for you at no charge. You can use it to push back against the HOA's claims. Why would you do it for free? Richard smiled slightly. Because I do not like fraudulent appraisals, and I especially do not like people being pushed off their family properties by corrupt HOA boards. Call it my good deed. Richard returned 3 days later with a formal appraisal document, professionally bound and full of comparable sales data, market analysis, and detailed findings. His final assessed value for my property was $1.2 million. The structure contributes approximately $300,000 to that value, Richard explained. It is a functional lakefront cabin with good bones. The remaining $900,000 is the land, but even that is on the low end because of how desirable lakefront access is right now. Kyle, you are sitting on a very valuable asset. I immediately sent a copy of Richard's appraisal to Marcus, who I could practically hear grinning through the phone when I called. This changes everything, Marcus said. Now we can demonstrate not only that the HOA's condemnation was baseless, but that their appraiser's valuation was so far off that it raises questions of fraud. I am going to file an amended complaint and send this to every regulatory body I can think of. The story was changing rapidly now, taking on a life of its own. Jennifer Reeves wrote a follow-up article featuring Richard's appraisal and directly comparing it to the HOA appraiser's $0 valuation. The headline was HOA appraiser undervalued lakefront cabin by $1.2 million. That article hit even harder than the first one. The Bureau of Real Estate announced they were opening a formal investigation into both Sharon Patterson and the appraiser, who had provided the $0 valuation. The California Attorney General's office sent representatives to interview me, Dorothy Wheeler, and several other Tahoe Pines residents. The local district attorney also started looking into whether criminal charges were warranted. Sharon resigned as HOA president 2 weeks after the second article. The HOA board issued a statement saying they had been unaware of potential conflicts of interest and were committed to reviewing all policies and procedures. They formally withdrew all actions against my property and refunded the fees I had paid for their frivolous hearing. But the legal consequences were just beginning. The State Bureau of Real Estate suspended the license of the appraiser who had valued my cabin at $0, pending a full investigation. They also opened an investigation into Sharon's daughter's real estate license and Cascade Mountain Properties business practices. Dorothy Wheeler, with Marcus's help, filed a civil lawsuit against Sharon, her daughter, and Cascade Mountain Properties, alleging fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse. The lawsuit sought to void the sale of her property and recover damages. 2 other previous sellers came forward and joined the lawsuit once they saw Dorothy taking action. I was not interested in suing, at least not initially. I just wanted to be left alone to enjoy my cabin. But Marcus convinced me that there needed to be accountability. If you do not take action, Sharon and her daughter might get away with this, Marcus argued. They will pay some fines, lose their licenses but keep all the money they made. You can send a message that this kind of corruption has real consequences. So I filed my own lawsuit, alleging abuse of power, defamation, infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy. I was not asking for a huge payout, just coverage of my legal fees and costs, plus punitive damages to make sure Sharon understood this had consequences. The civil cases moved slowly, as lawsuits do, but the criminal investigation moved faster. 8 months after my ordeal began, the local district attorney announced charges against Sharon Patterson and her daughter Melissa. Sharon was charged with multiple counts of fraud, conflict of interest, and abuse of power. Melissa was charged with conspiracy and real estate fraud. The criminal trial took place in South Lake Tahoe the following spring. I testified about Sharon's inspection, her manufactured concerns, and the $0 appraisal. David Cho testified about the actual condition of my cabin. Richard Carlson testified about proper appraisal standards and how far off the HOA appraiser's valuation had been. Dorothy Wheeler gave emotional testimony about being pressured and intimidated into selling her home. The prosecution presented emails between Sharon and Melissa discussing which properties to target next and how much profit they could expect. They showed financial records proving that Sharon had received payments from Cascade Mountain Properties, disguised as consulting fees. They demonstrated a pattern of Sharon using her HOA authority to create artificial crises that drove down property values, allowing her daughter's company to buy low and sell high after redevelopment. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They found Sharon guilty on 4 counts of fraud and 2 counts of abuse of power. Melissa was found guilty on 3 counts of conspiracy and 2 counts of real estate fraud. At sentencing 2 months later, the judge was scathing in his remarks. "You violated the trust of your community and abused a position of authority for personal profit," he told Sharon. "You targeted vulnerable homeowners, including elderly residents, and used intimidation tactics to deprive them of their property. This was not a lapse in judgment. This was a calculated scheme conducted over an extended period." Sharon was sentenced to 4 years in state prison and ordered to pay over $600,000 in restitution. Melissa received 3 years in prison and was ordered to pay $300,000 in restitution. Both were permanently barred from serving on any HOA board or holding any real estate license in California. The civil lawsuits settled shortly after the criminal convictions. Dorothy Wheeler got her property back after Cascade Mountain Properties was forced to return ownership as part of the settlement. The company had built a new house on the lot, which became hers. The other sellers received significant financial settlements. My settlement covered all my legal costs and provided a substantial additional payment for the stress and harm caused. More importantly, it included a permanent injunction preventing the Tahoe Pines HOA from taking any action against my property beyond reasonable, uniformly applied standards. The Tahoe Pines HOA itself went through a complete restructuring. A special election was held, and an entirely new board was voted in. They hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations and brought in a lawyer to completely rewrite the bylaws, removing the vague provisions that had given Sharon so much unchecked authority. The new board reached out to me personally with apologies and assurances that nothing like this would ever happen again. As I sit here now, 2 years after Sharon first drove up my driveway with her clipboard, the cabin looks better than it has in years. I used some of the settlement money to make improvements, not because anyone forced me to, but because I wanted to. New paint, new roof, repairs to that section of dry rot, some updated interior fixtures. The place is beautiful and, more importantly, it is still mine. I kept Richard Carlson's appraisal framed on the wall in my office, right next to the HOA's letter claiming my cabin was worth $0. It is a reminder of how close I came to losing everything and how important it is to stand up to bullies, even when they are hiding behind official titles and clipboards. The cabin remains my sanctuary, the place I come to decompress and remember my father and grandfather. I still spend summer mornings on the deck with my coffee, watching the mist rise off Lake Tahoe. The only difference now is that I truly appreciate what I have. Not just the property value, though that is significant, but the continuity, the history, and the memories contained in these walls. Dorothy Wheeler and I became friends through all of this. She sometimes comes over for dinner on her deck, which she can now do since she got her property back. She decided not to sell again, determined to enjoy her final years in the home she and her husband built together. Robert, the neighbor who first tipped me off about Sharon's connections, stops by regularly to fish off my dock. We have formed a tight-knit group of neighbors who went through this nightmare together and came out stronger. The new HOA board actually does what an HOA is supposed to do: maintain common areas, organize community events, and enforce reasonable standards fairly. They sent out a newsletter last month highlighting the history of various cabins in Tahoe Pines, including mine, celebrating the legacy properties rather than trying to erase them. Jennifer Reeves won a regional journalism award for her articles exposing the HOA corruption. She wrote a follow-up piece a year after the criminal trial, checking in on all the people affected. The article ended with a photo of me standing on my deck, the lake sparkling behind me, the cabin looking solid and beautiful. The caption read, "Kyle Nelson at the lakefront cabin the HOA claimed was worthless, now appraised at $1.2 million. I still get occasional calls from people facing similar HOA problems, referred by Marcus or Jennifer. I am not an expert, but I share my story and offer what advice I can. The most important lesson, I tell them, is to document everything. Get independent professionals involved early, and do not be afraid to fight back when you know you are right." The criminal appraiser who provided the $0 valuation lost his license permanently and faced his own criminal charges for filing false reports. It turned out my case was not isolated. He had been providing questionable valuations for various clients for years, always tailored to support whatever outcome the client wanted. The real estate board found evidence of at least a dozen other suspicious appraisals, and several of them became the basis for additional prosecutions. Cascade Mountain Properties went bankrupt during the legal proceedings, unable to survive the restitution orders and the flood of lawsuits from people who had purchased properties from them, only to discover the titles were clouded by the fraud allegations. The company's assets were liquidated, and the proceeds went toward victim restitution. Marcus retired from active practice last year, but still consults on interesting cases. He refers to my case as the highlight of his career, the perfect combination of David versus Goliath and clear-cut justice prevailing. We still meet for lunch every few months, and he always asks about the cabin. I think about how differently things could have gone. If I had been less stubborn or more willing to just give up, I would have lost my family cabin. If I had not had the resources to hire Marcus and David Cho, or if Robert had not given me that tip about Sharon's connections, the outcome might have been very different. It troubles me to think about how many people probably do lose their homes to corrupt HOA boards because they do not have the means or the knowledge to fight back. That is why I agreed to be interviewed for a documentary being produced about HOA abuses in America. The filmmakers found my story through the news articles and wanted to include it as a case study. I figured if my experience can help educate people about their rights and the warning signs of HOA corruption, it is worth sharing more widely. The documentary is set to premiere at a film festival next month. I am planning to attend, along with Dorothy and some of the other Tahoe Pines residents who were affected. It feels strange to be part of something like that, but also important. These stories need to be told. In quieter moments, usually early in the morning before the world fully wakes up, I think about my grandfather building this cabin with his own hands. He poured concrete, framed walls, and installed windows, creating something meant to last for generations. He could not have imagined his grandson fighting a legal battle to save it from a corrupt HOA president decades later. But I think he would be proud that I fought and won, that I refused to let someone arbitrarily destroy what he built. My ex-wife called me last year after seeing one of the news articles. We had not spoken in years, not since the divorce was finalized. She said she was proud of me for standing my ground and that she had always loved the cabin. It was a strange conversation, full of the awkwardness of shared history and separate lives, but it was also nice in a way. Some connections never fully break. I dated someone briefly last year, a woman I met through friends in South Lake Tahoe. She was kind and interesting, but it did not work out. She wanted me to sell the cabin and move closer to the city, to be more accessible. I realized pretty quickly that anyone who did not understand why this place mattered was not the right person for me. The cabin is not just an asset or a vacation home. It is part of who I am. This summer, I am planning to have a big gathering here, inviting everyone who helped me through the ordeal. Marcus and his wife, David Cho and his family, Richard Carlson, Jennifer Reeves, Dorothy, Robert, and the other neighbors who supported me. I am going to grill steaks, set up the fire pit, and spend an evening celebrating the fact that we are all here, at this cabin that supposedly had zero value, enjoying the view of a lake that never gets old. I have also been doing some volunteer work with a nonprofit that provides legal assistance to homeowners facing HOA disputes. I am not a lawyer, but I can share my experience and help people understand what they are up against. It is satisfying work, knowing that I might be able to help someone else avoid the nightmare I went through. The property market around Lake Tahoe has continued to climb. My cabin, even without any additional improvements, would probably appraise for close to $1.4 million now, according to Richard. He still sends me market updates every few months, just to keep me informed. I have no intention of selling, but it is nice to know that the value is there if I ever need it. I made one change to the front of the cabin last year that makes me smile every time I see it. I had a small bronze plaque made and mounted next to the front door. It reads, "Built 1983 by James Nelson. Defended 2024 by Kyle Nelson. May it stand for generations to come." It is a small thing, but it matters to me. This cabin has a story now, not just of construction and summers and family memories, but of standing up to corruption and winning. Future generations of my family, if I am lucky enough to have them, will inherit not just a building but a legacy of fighting for what is right. Sharon Patterson is currently serving her sentence at a women's correctional facility in Central California. I do not think about her often, but when I do, I hope she has time to reflect on the damage she caused and the lives she disrupted for nothing more than greed. Her daughter Melissa is in a different facility, also serving her time. I have no interest in their rehabilitation or their futures. They made their choices, and they are living with the consequences. The apology I received from the reconstituted HOA board hangs in a frame next to Richard's appraisal and the $0 valuation letter. It is a formal document signed by all 5 new board members, acknowledging the wrongs committed under the previous leadership and committing to transparent, fair governance going forward. They have kept that promise so far, and the community feels different now, less tense and suspicious. I have thought about writing a book about the experience, but I am not sure I have it in me. The documentary will probably tell the story better than I could anyway. Still, on quiet nights, I sometimes open my laptop and write down memories and details, just to have them recorded. Maybe someday they will become something more, or maybe they will just be a personal record for my own reference. One unexpected outcome of all this is that my business has improved significantly. I run a small consulting firm working remotely with tech companies on user experience design. During the legal battle, I had put a lot of my work on the back burner, focused entirely on saving my cabin. But after the news articles came out, several new clients reached out, saying they appreciated how I had handled the situation and wanted to work with someone who showed that kind of integrity and determination. It was not something I had anticipated, but I will take it. I upgraded the internet connection at the cabin last year, running fiber optic cable all the way out here. It cost a fortune, but it means I can work from the cabin full-time if I want to, which I increasingly do. Why sit in an office when I can take video calls with a lake view in the background? The deck that Sharon claimed was unsafe has become a bit of a local landmark. After Richard's appraisal mentioned it as a significant positive feature, and after David's engineering report confirmed it was overbuilt and could last decades, people started referring to it as the $1 million deck. I hosted a small fundraiser here last summer for the legal assistance nonprofit, and we raised over $30,000 in one evening, with donors specifically citing the story of the cabin and the deck as inspiration. Dorothy told me recently that she has updated her will to leave her property to her grandchildren, with specific instructions that it never be sold to a development company. She created a family trust to ensure the property stays in the family, managed properly, and maintained as a legacy. I have been thinking about doing something similar, creating a legal structure that protects the cabin from future threats, whether from corrupt HOAs or just the pressures of the real estate market. My father would have loved how this all turned out. He was a fighter, never backing down when he knew he was right, and I like to think I inherited that from him. There were times during the legal battle when I wanted to give up, when the stress and the cost seemed overwhelming, but then I would remember him and my grandfather, and I would find the strength to keep going. The California legislature actually passed new HOA reform legislation last year, partially inspired by cases like mine. The new laws require HOA boards to disclose any potential conflicts of interest, mandate independent assessments before condemnation actions, and create stricter oversight of HOA governance. It is not perfect, but it is a step in the right direction, and I am proud that my case contributed to that change. I still drive past Dorothy's old property sometimes, looking at the house that Cascade Mountain Properties built before everything fell apart. It is a beautiful home, modern and expensive, and Dorothy lives there happily now. But I always wonder if the developers thought about the lives they were disrupting when they schemed to force out longtime owners. Did they care? Did they even think about it? Or were properties just numbers on a spreadsheet, profit opportunities with no human cost attached? The community is healing, slowly but steadily. The new HOA board organized a history project last year, interviewing longtime residents and documenting the stories of the original cabins and families. My interview was one of the longest, covering not just my grandfather's construction of the cabin, but also the recent battle to save it. The recordings will be preserved in the local Historical Society archive, a permanent record of this community's evolution. I have started teaching myself woodworking, taking classes in Truckee on weekends. My goal is to build a small shed on the property, using the same techniques my grandfather would have used. It is a way of connecting with him and honoring his legacy, creating something with my own hands that will last. The HOA, incidentally, approved my shed plans without any drama, a marked change from the previous administration. The lake never changes, which I find comforting. It has been here for millions of years, and it will be here long after I am gone. The cabin may have been built in 1983, and it may have been defended in 2024, but the lake provides perspective. Our human dramas play out against a backdrop of geological time, and somehow that makes everything feel more manageable. I take the boat out most summer evenings now, just drifting on the water and watching the sunset. It is peaceful out there, away from land and people and complications. Sometimes Dorothy comes along, or Robert, and we fish and talk about nothing important. Those evenings are perfect in their simplicity, a reminder of what actually matters. Next month marks 3 years since Sharon first showed up with her clipboard. 3 years since my life turned upside down and I found myself in a fight I never wanted. It feels longer in some ways, shorter in others. But the cabin still stands, solid and beautiful, and I am still here, living my life on my terms, and that feels like victory. I have learned a lot about myself through this experience. I learned that I am more stubborn than I realized, more willing to fight than I thought I would be. I learned that asking for help is not weakness, that building a team of good people is essential when facing a serious challenge. I learned that corruption often hides behind official titles and formal procedures, and that shining light on it is the best disinfectant. Most importantly, I learned that home is worth fighting for, not just the building or the land, but what it represents. Memory, continuity, family, and identity. The cabin is all of those things to me, and no HOA president with a clipboard and manufactured concerns was going to take that away. As I finish writing this and close my laptop, I look out at the lake, golden in the late afternoon light. The deck boards are warm under my feet, the air smells like pine and fresh water, and I can hear an eagle calling somewhere above the trees. This is my place, my sanctuary, my inheritance, and my legacy. It was almost taken from me through fraud and corruption, but it survived, and so did I. The plaque by the front door was the right choice. Built by my grandfather, defended by me, and ready to be passed on to whoever comes next. That is a story worth preserving, a battle worth fighting, and a victory worth celebrating. The HOA condemned my Lakeside cabin as worthless. An appraiser valued it at $1.2 million the next week, and justice, eventually, was served.